The first light of dawn slipped through the tall windows of my Charleston townhouse, painting soft gold streaks across the shelves of folded antique fabrics in my workroom. My house creaked with the familiar whispers of age-old wood floors settling. The faint hum of the river outside. This was the life I had chosen, quiet, surrounded by pieces of history that most people overlooked. I padded into the kitchen in my wool slippers, brewed a pot of cinnamon tea, and opened my laptop to check the morning emails. A notification flashed across the screen, and my stomach tightened. Bank alert. $50,000 transfer request pending approval. I froze. I hadn't requested any transfer. My hand hovered over the mouse as if touching it might make the alert disappear. I scrolled through the details time-stamped at 2:17 a.m., originating from an IP address I didn't recognize. A cold ripple ran through me. Someone had tried to access my account. I leaned back in the chair, pulse quickening, and glanced toward the framed photograph of my late husband on the sideboard. His voice echoed in my memory. If family doesn't ask about your dreams, they'll ask about your money someday. He'd said it half in jest after one of those long, quiet dinners when Alara and Cole visited only to talk about themselves. Barely noticing me, I closed my laptop and pressed my palms against the worn oak table. Fear gave way to a sharper thought. If someone knew about my fortune, it meant a boundary had already been crossed. I had built my life and wealth quietly, hidden behind the image of a modest widow running a small textile shop. Only my financial advisor in Atlanta knew the full scope, over $25 million, carefully invested and protected through years of discipline. A chill passed through the room, and I shivered despite the heater's hum. Today was Thanksgiving. Alara and her family would arrive by noon. Part of me wanted to cancel, to stay safe in the cocoon of my solitude. But the other part, the mother still hoping for warmth, refused to give in to fear. I rose, poured my tea, and began polishing the heirloom crystal for the dining table. Trying to still the unease twisting in my chest, the silver caught the morning sun in fragile sparks, as if reminding me that even the most delicate things could endure. By the time I placed the last glass down, the house was awake, and I was ready for whatever the day would bring next. By late morning, the crunch of tires on the cobblestone street outside my townhouse signaled their arrival. I peered through the lace curtains just in time to see Alara's black luxury SUV glide to a stop, polished to a mirror shine, even from a distance. I could sense the air of triumph that always followed my daughter, her posture straight. Sunglasses perched perfectly. Cole stepping out with the ease of a man who thought the world was his front yard. The children tumbled out first, their designer coats brighter than the autumn leaves along the curb. Alara trailed behind them, her smile fixed and gleaming. And I braced myself. "Mom," she said, leaning in for a brief, perfunctory hug. Her eyes flicked over my old gray cardigan, still wearing the cozy classics. "I see." Cole glanced around the small entryway with a polite nod that felt like an inspection. "Charming little place?" he said. "You can really smell the history." I chose not to respond, ushering them toward the dining room where the table was set with the crystal I had polished before dawn. The sunlight caught on the delicate cuts, scattering rainbows onto the cream-colored walls. I found a small comfort in that beauty, even as I caught the flicker of Alara's smirk. "So, this is the famous antique dining room," she said, tracing a finger along the chair rail. "Still running that little hobby shop of yours." A part of me wanted to remind her that those hobbies had carried me through nights she never asked about. But instead, I just smiled and returned to the kitchen to check the turkey. I had learned long ago that silence was the gentlest armor. When we finally sat down, The air thickened. The scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon should have filled the space with warmth. Yet an invisible tension hummed beneath the clinking of silverware. Conversation drifted in and out, mostly about their upcoming ski trip and Cole's new business venture. I nodded in the right places, letting their words wash past me, until I caught Alara watching me with a strange intensity, her eyes sharp and calculating, as if she were waiting for something that hadn't happened yet. The unease I'd felt that morning crept back, curling low in my chest as I passed the cranberry sauce across the table. I carried the basket of warm dinner rolls into the kitchen, savoring the brief escape from the charged dining room. The scent of rosemary and yeast offered a small comfort as I checked the turkey resting on the counter. I heard the soft click of my iPad waking up on the side table, followed by the faint brush of fingertips across the screen. Alara, do you need something? I asked without turning around. Just looking for that sweet potato recipe, she said lightly. Her tone had an edge, though sharp. Curious. The next sound was a sharp inhale, loud enough to cut through the quiet hum of the oven. Mom? Her voice shook. Mom, what is this? I turned and saw her frozen, eyes wide, the iPad glowing in her hands. Across the screen, in neat black text, was the notification I had dreaded anyone would ever see. Camellia portfolio update. Current value, $25,347,000. Her fingers trembled, and then she pushed open the kitchen door with a sudden burst of energy, striding into the dining room like she was carrying evidence to a courtroom. Mom, this is real. You have $25 million. The clatter of forks and knives ceased instantly. My grandchildren went silent. Sensing something electric in the air, Cole leaned forward in his chair, his eyes catching the light with a predatory glint. I stepped into the room, heat blooming in my face. My secret, carefully guarded for more than a decade, now hung between the flicker of candlelight and the stunned faces of my family. You, Alara's voice cracked into a disbelieving laugh. You live like this, wearing old sweaters, and you've been hiding this. I met her gaze, steady despite the tremor in my chest. I haven't hidden anything. No one ever asked. The turkey, the cranberries, the polished crystal, all of it faded into the background. The room felt smaller, as if the walls had leaned in to witness my trial. Across the table, Cole leaned back, calculating, already rearranging his future in his mind, and in that heavy, unblinking silence, I understood that dinner had just become something entirely different. The clinking of cutlery stopped entirely, leaving only the faint hiss of the candles and the muffled hum of the heater. My family stared at me like a jury preparing to deliver a verdict. The warmth of Thanksgiving, the smells, the laughter I had hoped for evaporated under the weight of their eyes. Alara slammed the iPad on the table, the crystal glasses trembling. We worried about you for years. Mom, we thought you were barely scraping by, and all this time you were sitting on millions. Her voice rose, sharp and shrill, slicing through the quiet like a blade. Cole leaned forward, calm but menacing, pulling a pen and scrap of paper from his inner jacket pocket. Family should share. Miranda, transfer $5 million tomorrow. That still leaves you with plenty to enjoy. It's only fair. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, and studied the faces I once loved without question. My daughter's lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. My son-in-law's eyes shone with a cold, hungry gleam. Even the children shifted uneasily, sensing the shift in the room though they couldn't understand it. In that moment, I felt something break, not anger, not sadness, but the last thread of illusion that love had anything to do with this conversation. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my pulse tightening. Another alert Pending transfer. $50,000. Confirm. My chest tightened as I scrolled the details and caught the small note from my bank. Originating IP Atlanta. GA. I lifted my eyes to Ilara. She wouldn't meet my gaze. Her attention locked on the slip of paper in front of Cole. The hum of betrayal vibrated in my bones. Thanksgiving had turned into a courtroom, and I was the defendant, not the mother. I slid the phone back into my pocket, my decision crystallizing with a cold, sharp clarity. I would finish this meal, but the line they had crossed could never be uncrossed. I rose from my chair, my hands steady even as the air in the room seemed to vibrate with tension. The pen and paper lay between us like an ultimatum. My voice came out low and clear, slicing through the charged silence. If my love isn't enough without money, I said, it will never be enough with it. No one spoke. Ilara's jaw tightened, her nails digging into the linen tablecloth. Cole leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, measuring what he had just lost. The children stared at their plates, their small shoulders stiff with confusion. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my finger gliding through the logs I had been avoiding. There it was, access attempts on my LLC account from 3 days ago, all flagged from an Atlanta IP address. My heart gave a slow, heavy thud. Betrayal hadn't been born at this table. It had been planned in quiet shadows long before Thanksgiving dinner. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket and felt an almost physical shift inside me. Decades of silent endurance, every sidelong comment, every dismissive laugh, every Thanksgiving where I was the supporting character in my own home cracked and fell away like old plaster. Without another word, I crossed the room, lifted my coat from the rack, and slipped it on. My hand lingered on the doorknob for half a heartbeat, and then I opened it wide. The cold Charleston wind rushed in, smelling of the river and dry leaves. As I stepped outside, I didn't look back. The door closed behind me with a firm, resonant slam, echoing down the quiet street. It felt like punctuation to a sentence I had been writing silently for years. The night air bit at my cheeks, but with every step away from that house, I felt something loosen in my chest. The chill no longer felt cruel, it felt clean, bracing, like a tide washing me toward a life I should have claimed long ago. By the time I reached the end of the cobblestone street, I knew exactly where I was going next. Returning to my Charleston townhouse after that Thanksgiving night felt like stepping into a sanctuary I had neglected for too long. The familiar scent of cedar and old fabric greeted me as I set my coat on the rack. Silence filled the rooms. But it was no longer the heavy silence of disappointment. It was mine, and it was peaceful. The next morning, I opened the doors of my antique textile shop and let the sunlight flood in, illuminating bolts of faded linen and delicate lace. I had spent years hiding behind my work, quietly building a fortune that no one respected because they never cared to look closely. Now, I decided, my work would have a louder purpose. I invited Rena Lopez, a young single mother who had been a customer once, to come by after she finished her morning shift at the bakery. She loved historic fabrics but had no formal training. When she held an 1890s embroidered shawl in her hands for the first time, her eyes shone with the same reverence I'd felt at her age. "You can learn this," I told her, guiding her fingers along the fragile stitches. "The world still needs people who protect its history." Mentoring her stirred something alive in me. I began to see the outlines of a new life, forming one that didn't hinge on family approval or their absence. Within a week, I filed paperwork to create the Halstead Heritage Fund, pledging $100,000 to support young artisans and small historical preservation projects. In the evenings, I carried my tea out to the small balcony overlooking the Ashley River. watching the water catch the last blush of sunset. The river carried an easy rhythm, unbothered by the world's noise, and in that rhythm I felt my own heart settle. I was no longer a woman waiting to be seen. I was a woman building something worth leaving behind. When the phone rang late one night, I almost didn't answer, but the voice on the other end reminded me that the past was not done with me yet. Weeks passed in a quiet rhythm, my days filled with fabric, careful stitches, and the soft hum of new purpose. The shop had become a small haven for students and neighbors, the air scented with tea and the faint musk of old textiles. Nights were peaceful now, the river outside my window whispering of freedom. Then one night, long after the street lamps flickered on, my phone rang. The sharp sound cut through the calm like a splinter. I almost let it go to voicemail, but instinct made me pick it up. Mom. Ilara's voice was unsteady, raw in a way I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. Mom, I need help. I sat down slowly, bracing myself. What happened? It's all gone, she whispered, the words spilling out in a rush. The startup failed. Cole. He left. Creditors are calling, and I can't. Her breath caught on a sob. Mom, I need $2 million. Please, if you love me, you'll help me. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. In another life, that plea would have split me open. But now, all I could hear beneath it were echoes of that Thanksgiving table, her hand gripping my iPad, her voice sharp with accusation. The $50,000 transfer attempt that told the truth before she ever did. Ilara, I said, my voice calm and firm. I do love you, but I don't fund greed. A beat of silence stretched across the line, broken only by her jagged breath. You'll regret this, she choked out, the tremor of desperation hardening into anger. Then, the line went dead. I placed the phone on the table, my hand steady, my chest heavy but unbroken. For the first time in my life, I chose respect for myself over fear of losing her. The next morning, I opened the shop early, sunlight falling across the display window as if to remind me that life was still moving forward. And in that light, I saw the path I needed to keep walking. That night, after Ilara's call, I opened my leather-bound journal, the one I had carried for years but rarely used. Under the soft glow of the desk lamp, I wrote the words that had been forming quietly in my chest. I'm not losing a daughter. I'm losing a chain that's kept me small. Seeing it on the page felt like unlocking a door that had been rusted shut for decades. The following weeks moved in a rhythm that soothed me. My days filled with the soft murmur of apprentices learning to handle antique fabrics, the occasional buzz of museum curators asking for collaborations, and quiet dinners with people who cared about history rather than money, over warm soup and laughter in my modest kitchen. I felt something unfamiliar but steady, a chosen family, forming around respect, curiosity, and sincerity. One afternoon, I carried a rare 19th century quilt to the Charleston Historical Museum, a piece I had preserved for years. I signed the donation papers under my own name, Halstead, and for the first time, I felt pride without apology. The curator clasped my hands with genuine gratitude, eyes shining. You're helping us preserve a story that might have been forgotten, she said. The weight of that moment sank deeper than any thank you I had ever received from my own blood. My family had looked at me as a resource, a wallet with a heartbeat. These strangers saw me as a person who had something meaningful to offer the world. Evenings by the Ashley River became my ritual. I would sit on the small balcony, tea in hand, and watch the light fade over the water, feeling the last threads of guilt loosen from my heart. When November's crisp air returned, I realized that Thanksgiving was approaching again. This year, The thought didn't bring dread or longing, just a quiet curiosity about how I wanted to spend it. And with whom. 1 year later, my townhouse felt alive in a way it never had before. The dining table, draped in a cream linen runner, was surrounded by my students, neighbors, and the few friends who had grown into family. Laughter rippled through the rooms, mingling with the buttery scent of pecan pie and roasted squash. The soft hum of conversation echoed against the old walls, warm and unforced, like this house had finally found its true voice. I moved between the kitchen and dining room with ease, passing plates of sweet potatoes and slices of homemade cornbread. Rena carried the cranberry sauce to the table, her little boy toddling behind her, and the guests leaned in to admire a 19th century serving dish I had set out just for the occasion. Their appreciation was genuine, rooted in shared curiosity and care, not expectation. As the sun began to lower, painting the street in soft amber, I stepped toward the window to light the last candle on the sill. That's when I saw her. Ilara stood on the sidewalk, clutching a plain brown grocery bag, her coat wrinkled and her eyes rimmed with red. The world seemed to pause for a single, fragile moment. Our eyes met through the glass. She didn't wave. She didn't move toward the steps. And yet, in that silent exchange, I felt the weight of something unspoken regret, shame, and perhaps the smallest seed of longing. I let my hand rest against the cool window pane, then gave the smallest nod, a quiet acknowledgement of the apology she couldn't voice. I didn't open the door. Some boundaries, once drawn, are what allow love to survive in its truest form. Behind me, laughter rose again from the table, pulling me back into the room where life continued to unfold without pause. I turned from the window, letting the warmth of my chosen family carry me toward the evening's final toast. By spring, the archive room above my shop had transformed into a living workshop. Bolts of antique fabric lined the walls, and the long walnut tables were always dotted with threads, needles, and careful hands. The room hummed with energy, a rhythm of discovery and quiet pride. My apprentices came from all walks of life: retired teachers, young designers, a chef who wanted to decorate his restaurant with authentic 19th century linens. Each of them carried the same spark I had once nursed in solitude. One afternoon, as the sun poured through the tall windows, Rena approached me with a small parcel wrapped in tissue. Inside lay a piece of hand-embroidered linen, its delicate stitches forming a blooming camellia. "You gave me a future," she said softly, her voice catching. "Not just money, but belief. No one's ever given me that before." I traced the stitches with my fingertip, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. In that moment, I understood that my fortune wasn't the sum of my accounts. It was the life I had chosen to shape, one that didn't need permission or apology. Later that evening, I walked to the riverfront. The Ashley River moved lazily under the soft gold of dusk, and a breeze lifted the edges of my scarf. My reflection rippled in the water, older and calmer, but finally, mine. I opened my journal and wrote. I closed one door, but I opened the rest of my life. The words flowed easily, like I had been waiting years to set them free. Behind me, my townhouse glowed with warm light, filled with the voices of people who saw me for who I truly was. Somewhere in the world, Ilara carried her own choices, and whether or not our paths met again no longer defined my peace. I turned from the river, heading home to the laughter drifting from my archive room, knowing that my legacy would live in stitches, stories, and the quiet freedom of a life finally claimed.